What I'm going to try to do today is go through some things because the screen is kind of small. And what I'm going to try to do is, first of all, in your packet is a copy of the forms. All right, take that out, and we're going to be reviewing them point by point. And the second important item that you have is a copy of the slides, because it's going to be hard to see them from the screen right here, so I have them out so you can look at them. But first of all, I'm going to do this in three parts. First of all, I'll give you an introduction, what the forms are, what they do, what the purpose behind them, so you know exactly what you're facing. Secondly, I'll go through the forms in a general sense so you can understand exactly what they are and what the purpose behind them. And then I'll delve in a little deeper through the slides and what each section talks about, so you have a good general knowledge of what the forms do and what information you have to collect. So first of all, let's talk about the forms in general, what the purpose behind these forms are. And the purpose behind these forms are threefold. For the first time in 2015, employers 50 or more will have to report on themselves about what coverage they're offering to their employees. The only way that the IRS is going to know that you're not complying with the employer mandate is that you report on yourself. And that's the purpose behind the 1095C, Parts 1 and 2. So you'll see there with the offer of coverage, that's the purpose behind this form, is that starting in 2015, you have to report on yourself. In 2014, of course, there was no reporting, so the IRS didn't know what was going on. Everybody was on the honor system. So they didn't know who was eligible for credits and subsidies. They didn't know anything. Two, the second purpose behind this form is to indicate who has coverage. And there's going to be two forms for that. You'll see in your packet of forms a 1095B and the third section, Part 2 of the 1095C. That's to indicate who is covered under your plan, and I'll be mentioning that. In 2014, again, the IRS had no information about who actually had coverage. The only thing individuals had to do was check line 662 of the 1040 to indicate whether you had any coverage or not, and they took your word for it. So they had no way of knowing if you got coverage. So the second purpose is to validate who has coverage for the individual mandate. The third purpose is to report to the IRS who is covered and who is offered coverage for the credits and subsidies. In 2014, people got credits and subsidies, and it was all on the honor system. So they had no clue. An employee could be offered coverage, they went to the exchange, they could lie to the exchange, and there was no way for the IRS to know. So these forms serve three purposes. Now, there's two sets of forms I'll be talking about, the 1095B and the 1094B. The 1095B is for insurance companies and small self-insured employers. And the whole purpose behind this form is to report who is covered under your plan, pure and simple. So as an employer, if you are insured, your employees will get a 1095B, which would be prepared by the insurance company and given to the employees. And then you, if you're 50 or more, will do the 1095C for the employer mandate. And you have to give a copy of the 1095C to your employees, so they'll get two forms, and what you should do is warn them that they're going to get two forms if you're insured. All right? Any questions so far? Now, the companies that the other series of forms are the 1095C and the 1094C. The purpose behind this form is to, for any employer with 50 or more employees or full-time equivalent employees, have to file this form. And you say to yourself, well, I thought the employer mandate was delayed for those between 50 and 99. Yes, that's true, but you still have to file the form. So even though the mandate in 2015 applies to large employers, 100 or more, if you're between 50 to 99, you have to file the 1095-C. And please understand that. So even though you're not subject to the mandate, you still have to file the form. So now there's a side note here which is extremely important. You have to start collecting information starting January of 2015 to indicate who's full-time, because the only individuals that get a copy of the 1095-C are full-time employees if you're insured. So you have to determine as of January 2015 if anybody is going to be full-time for any months during 2015, and they have to get a copy of the 1095-C. So if somebody's full-time for 1 month, they get a copy of the form. Now, unlike the W-2 that you're used to, the W-2 file reports forms on a calendar year basis. The 1095-C reports activity on a monthly basis. So there are, and I'll be going through this, there are lines 14, 15, and 16 that could vary during the year, which I'll be covering. So it's extremely important that you start collecting information to be able to file this form, and the 1095-B and the 1095-C have to be filed with the IRS by either by the end of February or the end of March, depending if you do it electronically. If it's done electronically, it's done by the end of March. And you have to give a copy of this form to the employees by February 1st of 2016. All right? So each employee gets their own individual form addressed to them. Some people first thought, oh, I just have to file one. No, you have to give one copy to each employee. And that reports their activity during 2015. Please understand that. Now, another important thing you have to do, if you have a company that has full-time, part-time, and variable hour employees, you have to determine if any of those individuals are full-time for 2015, because they have to get a copy of the form. So if you have people that sometimes work full-time, sometimes work part-time, starting January 1st, 2015, you have to determine whether those individuals are full-time and get a copy of the form. Now remember, only those employers that have 50 or more full-time or full-time equivalent employees get a copy of the form. That determination whether you're an ALE, applicable large employer, is done during calendar year 2014, or any 6-month period in 2014, consecutive 6-month period. So you have to look at as of December 31st of 2014 and see how many employees you have on average during that period of time, 2014, to see if you have to file the form. If you have under 50 full-time and full-time equivalent employees, you don't have to file the form. There's no reporting. The only thing your employees will get if you're insured is a copy of the 1095-B that shows coverage. All right? Any questions so far? People are stunned. Now, before I go any further, one thing I've always asked is, will there be people that have software packages that will help you? Absolutely. I'm helping 2 vendors right now with software packages, and they're going to be out momentarily if not some out already. But the problem is with the software is you have to understand what to put in the input sheets. If you don't understand the questions that they're asking, it's going to be garbage in, garbage out. That's going to be, and if somebody tells you, oh, this software will do everything for you, they're lying to you. You have to have a basic understanding of healthcare reform in order to answer the questions. Now, the purpose behind today's presentation is to get you more comfortable. This is not as scary as it looks. I think once you get more comfortable with it, then it's going to seem not such a daunting task. Now, for those employers in the audience that have just full-time employees, they don't have variable hour employees, and you have very little turnover, the completion of these forms are going to be a snap. They're going to be not going to be a problem. Most employees will have one code during the year, no problem. I just met with an employer that had that exact same situation, and we went through the form, and they were comfortable within about a half hour, 45 minutes. The ones that are going to have problems, the employers are going to have problems, are those that are part-time and variable hour employee, or employers that have a lot of turnover. Those are the ones that are going to have problems because there's going to be one employee may have multiple codes during the year, and you have to trace that and understand that. So that's extremely important to understand. All right? So let's pull out the forms. Let's do a nice introduction to the forms. This is the 1095B. Now, the only reason I'm covering this form is because if your employee gets a copy of this and they say, "What is this form?" and you say, "I have no idea."
Where'd you get it?
Beats me. Who gave it to you? If you're insured, every one of your employees will get a copy of this form if they're covered by your plan. And again, the purpose behind this form is for the individual mandate. That's the purpose behind this form. So the responsible individual is the employee. Their information will go down there. The name, the social security number, street address. And then you'll see in box 8, enter letter identifying origin of policy. There's a series of codes which I'll be covering in a few minutes that indicates if it's individual policy, employer coverage, and there's a series of codes which I'll be covering in a few minutes. Part 2 is the employer-sponsored coverage. If you're insured, the insurance company will put your name there. Okay? So the employer's name will go there, street address, and then the issuer or other coverage provider is the insurance company. Who is providing the coverage? Yes?
Self-insured people.
Self-insured people. If you're self-insured and you're under 50, you use this form.
Okay,
Over
over 50?
50, you use the 1095C, and you complete sections 1, 2, and 3. I will be mentioning that in a few minutes. Okay? So if you're insured, or if you're under 50 and you're self-insured, you do this form. Now, part 4 is every member of the family that's covered by your plan will be indicated there. It's going to be the husband and wife and all the kiddies will be indicated there. And it indicates their name, social security number, and if you can't get a social security number, the date of birth. Now, just note there, you have to make an effort to get the social security number. And there's going to be some employees that object to that. Why do you need my child's social security number? There's a conspiracy out there. No, we need it to complete the form. If they refuse to give it to you, you have to make attempts to do it. If you can't, then you have to get their date of birth. And then you have to indicate for what months they were covered during 2015. If it's all 12 months, then you do the column D, and if it's not for 12 months, you indicate for what months they were covered. It's a fairly simple form, and it's only for one purpose. Let's go on to the next form. This is the 1094B. The 1094B is a transmittal form. So if the insurance company was filing 25 or 30 1095Bs for you, they'll slap one 1094B on top of it and send it to the IRS. So all it is a transmittal form. The filer's name would be the insurance company. If they're filing it for you, they will file it for you. And then they put a name of a person to contact at the insurance company, street address, and all they put in there was the total number of 1095Bs. That's it. And they sign it, date it, and they send it in. So this form is fairly simple. All right? Any questions on the 1094 or 1095Bs? Any questions at all? Let's move on to the 1095C. Part 1 is the employee. Their name will go there, their name and address. This is the 1095C. And on the right side is the applicable large employer, which would be you. Now again, the entity that will have to file this, if you have 50 or more full-time or full-time equivalent employees, you have to file this form. And again, as I indicated, that is determined during 2014. It's an average. I get a lot of questions, well, we just turned 50 this year. Well, don't panic yet, because it's an average during the calendar year. And they created a special rule for 2014 that you can use any consecutive 6-month period. So if you have seasonal employees in the certain parts of the year you don't have that many employees, use those times where you don't have a lot of employees, but you can use any 6-month period consecutive in 2014. So if you're 50 or more, then you have to complete this form. So part 1 is fairly simple: employee information, employer information. Now where it gets more complicated is part 2. Part 2, line 14 is offer of coverage, letter required code. There's a series of codes which I'll be covering in a few minutes that you'll put in there, and those codes basically indicate who you offered coverage to. Did you offer coverage during any of the months to those individuals? Did you offer coverage to the employee only, to the employee and spouse, the employee and children, or didn't you offer any coverage at all? So as I said before, what you're doing is self-reporting on yourself. Now remember, certain individuals who are just hired in, there's going to be months that one code applies because you didn't offer them coverage because either they weren't there or they weren't eligible. That's fine, no problem. So there could be situations where there could be more than one code that goes into the months in line 14, which I'll be covering in a few minutes. But that code in line 14 is what coverage you offered to your employees. And remember, it's the offer of coverage, not the coverage they actually took. And it's the cheapest coverage you offered them. So if you offer a bronze, silver, or gold plan, basically what you do, the offer of coverage, the bronze plan you report. In line 15 is the employee contribution. And again, it's not the coverage they took, it's the cheapest plan that you offered them. So again, if you offer the bronze, the silver, and the gold, and they took the gold, you report the employee contribution for the bronze.
So then, wouldn't it be bronze all the way through for every, I mean, if you have 3 plans,
Correct.
it would be bronze.
Correct. If that's the cheapest plan that you offer,
Right.
you are correct. So remember, it's not the plan they took as what you, and remember, the part 2 is employee offer and coverage. So it's what you offer them. So 14 again, what members of the family you offered coverage to, was that coverage minimum value coverage? Line 15 is the amount that the employee would have paid for that cheap coverage. And then line 16, it's 8 or 9 different situations that are reported on line 16. And I'll go through all the different codes. Was that person not employed for any of those months? Were they covered by the plan? Did they waive, and what affordability safe harbor applies? So there's 6 or 7 different situations that could enter into that line 16. And the problem is, if you had a lot of turnover, there could be situations that one employee could have 2 or 3 codes in 1 year. And I'll give you an example. An example is, suppose somebody is hired in August. So between January and July, there's one code indicating that employee was not employed. And you have a 2-month waiting period. That's another code. And then they took a coverage from October through December. That's a 3rd code. So there could be, realistically, some situations where there could be 3 codes for one individual. And I'll explain each code to you. And then, okay, if you're insured, you stop right there, and that's the only sections you complete if you're insured. Sections 1 and sections 2. That's it. You stop. If you're self-insured and 50 or more, then you complete Part 3. And like the 1095B, you have to report whether that individual was covered and for what months they were covered during 2015. And you report the whole family, the husband and wife and the kids are all reported there on Part 3. But again, if you're insured, don't complete it. Okay? Any questions so far? Yes?
On 15, it says here, it's a cell phone, so if an employee with a family.
Just report individual coverage. It's only individual. Now remember, the purpose behind line 15 is the affordability. So remember, what you're doing and think in your mind is that the purpose behind this form is, Mr. Employer, you're self-reporting on yourself. The IRS will take this information and then penalize you if the answers are incorrect. So I'm trying as best as possible to advise clients not to be penalized and make sure you answer the questions truthfully, but understand what you're answering. So if you didn't offer someone coverage, just fess up to it and put it in. What will happen is when this is filed at the end of February or March, then you'll get a friendly letter from the Internal Revenue Service saying this is the penalty. Now let's go on to the next form. The 1094C, like the 1094B, is a transmittal form. Then you as an employer will complete Part 1. Now, a couple of warnings here. When you complete Part 1, name a person to contact. Make sure whoever's name goes in there and their telephone number, they know what's going on. They know what the form is. You don't want to get a call from the IRS and somebody says, I don't know what you're talking about. Also, if you look at the bottom of the form, and it says, under the penalties of perjury, I declare that I have examined the return and accompanying documents, and to the best of my knowledge and belief, they are true, correct, and complete. Who's going to sign it? I can see there was an old ad in the 60s and 70s, Mikey, for check cereal. Let Mikey sign it. And I have these visions that if that this return is incomplete, and all of a sudden you see an episode of The Wire. That prison, what are you in here for murder? What are you in here for? My 1094s were incomplete. Now again, the IRS has said the first year, if there's mistakes on the form and you made a good faith effort, there's not going to be any penalties. But they didn't define what a good faith effort was. So try to complete it as best you can, and I know these forms are complicated, but again, I think what's going to, if the return is full of mistakes, I think the IRS is going to determine that was not a good faith effort. Okay, so Part 1 is basic information. Line 9, designated governmental entity. Many times with municipalities, one unit of the municipality will file for all the others. For example, the municipality may file for the school, the fire district, the library, so the municipality's name would go there. So if you're not a municipality or government unit, just ignore line 9 through line 15. Line 18, total number of forms in the 1095C submitted and transmittal. How many 1095Cs were completed and attached to this? Fairly simple. Where it gets complicated is line 19. Line 19 asks, is this an authoritative transmittal for this ALE member? If yes, check the box and continue. What does that mean? Let's say you had a company with 3 different companies in a control group, A, B, and C. Each have their own EIN numbers. In the past, they've always filed their W-2s separately. They have their own payroll. And with W-2s, you can do that, no problem. Now, you can do that, the same thing with 1095Cs. But what the IRS says is the fact that one of the 1094Cs has to contain aggregate information for all three companies. So what that means is, if you say no, this is not an authoritative transmittal, you stop right there. And for the one company that's filing aggregate, you answer yes, and then complete 20, 21, 22, Part 3, and Part 4. Yes?
So would one of the companies, so each three of the companies would complete this form, it's just one of the companies would do the transfer.
Correct. And again, it's up to, now all three companies could file together. They don't have to file their 1095C separately, but if they wanted to, the little blurb here is the fact that one of the 1094Cs has to contain aggregate information, which I will go through in more detail. Okay. Now, so 20, total number of 1095Cs filed on behalf of the LE member. That's on a control group basis. So there's a possibility that lines 20 and 18 could be different numbers, depending on how many 1094Cs you're completing. Line 21, it says ALE member is a member of an aggregate LE group. What does that mean? It means that are you part of a control group? Does your employer own other businesses that you control? And if you answer that question yes, then there's a part of the form that you have to complete, which I will be mentioning in a few minutes. But you have to find out from your employer whether they own other business or they are part of a control group. And your attorney and your accountant or the owner of your company should know that. All right? And then we go on line 22. Certifications of eligibility, select all that apply. And you have 4 choices. You have 4 boxes, A, B, C, and D. Qualifying offer. What is a qualifying offer method? A qualifying offer method means that you offered coverage to all employees and their dependents, and the employee doesn't pay more than 9.5% of the federal poverty line for their coverage, which is currently $11,670. Now, if you qualify for that, then you basically don't have to complete line 15, and if you wanted to, you, instead of giving the employees a 1095C, you only give them a statement saying you're not eligible for credits and subsidies, if you wanted to do that. But it only applies if the employees don't pay more than 9.5% of the mainline federal poverty, which is currently $11,670, which most employers are not that generous. Line B, box B, qualifying offer method. It's a way of providing, alternative way of providing the 1095C. I would never check box B. It's extremely complicated. But I would check box C. Section 4980H transitional rule. All employers are going to be in a transitional basis, so I would always check box C. Box D, 98% offer method. Did you offer coverage to 98% of your employees and their dependents? If you did, check that box. And if you look at the next page, if you look at part 3, you don't have to complete column B. You leave that blank. Now let's go to part 3. Column A, minimum essential coverage. There's 2 situations you would always answer yes to. First of all, if you're 100 or more, did you offer coverage to at least 70% of your employees? If you did, 70% of your full-time employees. If you did, you answer yes. If you're between 50 to 99 and the employer mandate doesn't apply to you, you also answer yes. B, full-time employees count. You count anyone who is full-time during the year. You don't include someone who's in a waiting period, excuse me, or in a measurement period. You leave those people out. C, the total number of employees. Remember, it's everyone, including part-timers. Now, please remember, if your business is either a partnership or a S corporation, the owners, the more than 2% shareholders or the partners are not considered employees. They're not in the count. They don't get a copy of this form. All right? D, aggregate group indicator. If you're a member of a control group, column D would be checked for any month that you're part of a control group. Column E, section 4988 transitional rule. If you checked box C in line 22, you would either have to put code A or code B. Code A is you're between 50 and 99, and code B is if you're 100 or more. Moving on to part 4. If you're a member of a control group, part 4 will you have to indicate each member, their name and EIN, and you list them with the member of the control group that has the most employees would be listed first. And a friend of mine said, well, how are they going to know? I said, I don't know. I don't know how the IRS would know if you got them out of order. There's no way they would know. So,
Wouldn't it tie back to the WG somehow? Wouldn't they know that somehow? I think.
they could.
EIN.
Oh my God, they're out of order. I can see it now.
Yeah.
As you can see, these returns are not for the faint of heart. It takes some time to go through them. Are there any questions right now? Any questions? Would you like a glass of wine? No. All right, let's pull out the slides. Now, everything I just talked about are on these slides. So if you have not taken great notes, don't worry. Everything I've talked about is in these slides. So I'll go through them slide by slide so you know exactly how they work. So slide 1, I'm sorry. Slide 2. This is under 6055 and 6056. 6055 indicates the fact that there's going to be reporting for the employer mandate. That's why 1095B was created, and the 1095C Part 3 was created for the employer mandate. 6056 is for the applicable large employers to report what coverage they offer to the employees. So that's the under 6056. Let's go to slide 3. So this whole process has only been around for a little over a year. March of 2014, the IRS came out with regulations which were extremely difficult. Last July, they released the draft forms. They released instructions in August of 2014. And these forms that you see here are for 2014, not for 2015, which you have to file. So they could be slightly different next year. But these forms were only released by February 4th, 2015, which was not too long ago. Now, the forms that I've been covering are listed on slide 4. The 1095Bs, the 1094Bs, which I just covered. One form I didn't go through is a 1095A. What is a 1095A? A 1095A is for the exchanges are going to give any individual that enrolled in the exchange, they will get a form, they will get a 1095A. And I think they gave them out this year. So anybody enrolled, they will get a 1095A. Let's go to slide 5. So again, an ALE 50 or more must file one or more Form 1094Cs and must file a 1095C for each employee. So that's one thing I think employers have had a tough time really understanding, that this is like a W-2, is individually, is going to be reported and filed for each individual employee. And if you, again, have a self-insured plan, and if you're 50 or more, you have to complete Form 1095C, and you have to complete sections 1, 2, and 3. Now, for any of you who are self-insured, just one other caveat. You also have to complete a 1095C for any individual who is not an employee who is covered by your plan, which means COBRA participants, retirees, any board members who are not employees. So therefore, because Part 3 is used for the individual mandate, you also have a responsibility of providing a 1095C for any individual that's covered under your plan that's not an employee. Now, for those of you that are insured, they will get a 1095B, no problem. And you have to worry about any individuals that are not employed. So your responsibility, if you're insured, is just to give a 1095C to anyone who is full-time. Okay? Now, if you have a situation where you offer some options that are insured and some options that are self-insured, you have to remember that for those options that are insured and people are covered by that self-insured option, you have to make sure you complete Part 3. And for those options that are insured, you don't have to complete Section 3. So if you just offer a self-insured plan, there's no problem. Okay, let's go to slide 6. Now again, as slide 6 indicates, you have to complete sections 1 and section 3 for any individual that is covered by your plan, even if they're not full-time. So again, if you cover any part-timers or any retirees or any COBRA participants, you still have to complete the form. Now, if an employee is full-time for any month of the calendar year, the employee must also complete Part 2 of Form 1095C. And for any individual that is not full-time, the employer must complete only Part 2, line 14 by entering code 1G for all 12 months columns. And that you would do for anyone who is not a full-time employee, a COBRA participant, or otherwise not employed, you put a 1G there. Let's go to slide 7. Now, when do these forms have to be filed with the IRS? And again, depending on how you file them, if you file them electronically, they would be filed by the end of March. If you file them in paper, you have to, again, file it by the end of February. So you have a choice. You can do it through paper. Now, if you're going to be filing 250 or more 1095Cs, you have to do it electronically. Let's go to slide 8. What has to be provided to participants and when? Each employee has to get a copy, again, of the 1095C. It has to be given out by February 1st of 2016. So they have to get a copy in their hand by that date. Now, just as a coincidence, these are the same time frames that apply to W-2s, same time. Now, what I would urge you to do, before you, as you're sending out the 1095Cs, you may also want to send out a short explanation of what that form is, because you don't want to be inundated with phone calls by employees saying, why am I getting this? What is this? What does it do? Did I do something wrong that I'm getting a 1095C? And remember, the employees are going to have no clue when you give them the 1095C what the codes mean in lines 14 and 16. They'll have no idea. So you may be inundated with phone calls from individuals saying, what does this all mean? So what I would do is I would prepare a short explanation on what this form is. Let's go to slide 9. I'm going to go through the 1095B very quickly again. So, and again, if any employee asks you what it is, you'll know. First of all, Part 1, responsible individual. Again, that is the individual, the primary insured employee, former employee, parent, uniform service sponsor, or other person enrolling individuals in coverage. So that's the individual. That could be the COBRA participant. That could be the employee. So when you look at the 1095B, that's what that is. Slide 10. As I indicated in my beginning presentation on Part 1, line 8, there's a series of codes that go there. Code A is small business health options. B is employer-sponsored coverage. C is governmental-sponsored program. D is individual market. E is multi-employer plan. And F is miscellaneous essential coverage. Now, the most common question I get, suppose I'm an employer with union employees. First of all, if I'm determining whether I'm a large employer, do they count? Yes, they do. Who is responsible for providing those union employees with a copy of the 1095C? You. Because the employer mandate applies to you. You don't get a buy just because they're union employee. But what I would try to do is negotiate with the union and say they will provide the 1095C for you, because they have all the information. But again, you don't get a buy just because these employees are union employees and they're under a collective bargaining agreement. You still have the employer mandate to them, and if that union coverage is not affordable minimum coverage, you would be penalized as an employer. Okay? Let's go to Form 1095B. Part 2, employer coverage. This part is only completed by the insurers of the insured group. Insurance companies entering either code A or B on line 8 will complete Part 2. Employers reporting self-insured coverage on Form 1095B enter code B, but do not complete Part 2. Go to slide 12. Part 3, issuer of other coverage on slide 12. That part would be completed by the insurance company, and if you're self-insured and under 50, your name will go there. Going on to slide 13. Covered employees, as I indicated before, it's all covered members of the family would be included there. Each one would be listed separately there, and you would indicate for what months those individuals were covered. And again, the purpose behind Part 2 is for the employer, it's for the individual mandate. So if the Social Security number of the covered person cannot be obtained, then the person's date of birth must be entered. So again, you have to make an effort, though, to ask the employee for a copy of the Social Security number. Let's go on to slide 14, excuse me. The 1094B is fairly simple. The name and address and employer ID must be indicated. Line 4, the contact telephone number. Line 9 be the total figure, and the form must be signed and dated. So that's the 1094 and 1095B. Let's stop right there for a few minutes. Let's take a 5 or 10 minute break, and then we'll continue, okay? So once, because I see 15, who's your full-time employees? Because only those individuals that are full-time will get a copy of the 1095C. So that's what, so collecting information is going to be extremely important this year to make sure you understand each individual that's full-time, because if you miss somebody and they go on the exchange and get a credit and subsidy, then you're going to be penalized $3,000. So It's extremely important to look in, especially if you have part-time or variable hour employee, make a determination if any of those individuals have become full-time. Now remember, we've talked in the past about measurement periods, and everybody thought because the mandate was delayed for another year, we didn't have to worry about it. Au contraire, because full-timers will have to get a copy of this form. So you have to make that determination as of January 2015 to see who gets the form. Okay, now, other people are asking about HRAs. I have a insured product, but I have an HRA. The HRAs are ignored for this purpose. So you don't have to worry about HRAs if you have an insured product. Okay, let's go to the 1095C. Let's go to slide 15. Part 1, again, lines 1 through 6 indicate the name and address and social security number of the person. Lines 7 through 13 indicate the name, address, and employer ID for the employer. Line 10 indicate the telephone number of the person that the employee participant can call if he or she has questions. That's slide 15. Slide 16, we start talking about line 14. And again, the purpose behind line 14 is to indicate what coverage you offer to your employees, your full-time 2015. So, and you have to indicate was the offer of coverage was for all 12 months or for any month during the year. A code must be entered for each month. Enter the code identifying the type of coverage. Now on page or slide 17 is the various codes. And let me explain each one. Code 1A if you have a qualifying offer, and a qualifying offer means the employees didn't pay more than 9.5% of the federal poverty line, which is currently $11,670. 2B is a minimum value offered to the employee only. 2C is minimum essential coverage providing minimum value offered to the dependents, not the spouse. 2D is minimum essential coverage providing minimum value offered to the employee, the spouse, not dependents. And 1E is the entire family is offered coverage. Now, please indicate there if you don't want to analyze, you want to make sure that you either 1C or 1E. Because one is, because remember, under healthcare reform, you don't have to offer coverage to the spouse. But if you offer coverage to everyone, all full-timers, then you would want to do 1E. Let's go on to slide 18. 1F, minimal essential coverage, not providing minimum value. 1G, offer of coverage to an employee who was not a full-time employee for any month of the calendar year and who was enrolled in self-insured coverage. That means anyone on COBRA, retiree, or anyone who is a non-employee that's covered under your plan, and that includes part-timers, would get 1G entered on line 14. 1H, no offer of coverage. Now, that could be an appropriate code 1H if that person either was not employed or was not eligible. So it's not fatal if you put 1H for a code for someone who was either not there or not eligible for coverage. And then 1I is qualifying offer transitional relief. You don't want to pick that because it's extremely confusing. So I would not pick 1I. Any questions? So again, there are situations you could have more than one individual during the year, especially if they were just hired during 2015, because you could have 1H for part of the year and then either 1C or 1E for the rest of the year. So it's possible. So there could be more than one code during the year. Any questions? Let's go to slide 19. Line 15 is only completed if the coverage offered to the employee provided minimum value. You answer either 1B 1D or 1E is entered in the line in either all 12 months or a box for any month. So if you did a qualifying offer, you wouldn't have to complete line 15. But enter the total amount in total cents. If no amount is required, enter 0. All 12 months, you just enter it in the first column. Now, if you did not offer coverage to an employee, you do leave it blank. Just leave it blank. All right, let's go to slide 20. Line 16, enter the applicable code for the code section 49AHH safe harbors and other relief. And again, if the offer was made for the entire calendar year, place the code in the first column. And if none of the codes apply, then you leave it blank. Now, line 20, slide 21 indicates each situation that's covered on line 16. Let me go through them very carefully. One of the situations as reported is if a person was unemployed during the year or was not a full-time employee. The employer was employed in minimal essential coverage. The employer was in employee was in a limited non-assessment period. What does that mean? It's either in a waiting period or a measurement period. If you're in a non-calendar year transitional relief, if you're 100 or more and you have a non-calendar year, you don't have to comply with the employer mandate until your renewal date in 2015. So during the year, if you're eligible for that transitional role, for any months that transitional role applies, that code would go there. Next, if the employer met one of the affordability safe harbors, and if the employee was eligible for the multi-employer interim relief. I'll describe each one to you. Let's go on to slide 22. All right, 2A, enter 2A for an employee who was not employed for any day of the month. So therefore, if you hire someone in August, between January and July, you would put 2A for each month there. So 2A would apply. 2B is someone who is not a full-time employee for the month and did not enroll in minimal essential coverage. Enter 2B also if the employee is a full-timer for any month and whose offer of coverage ended before the last day of the month. So there could be situations where people terminate during the month and their coverage ends, and that month that they terminate, you have to put 2B there. That's a possibility. Let's go to slide 23. 2C. 2C is the most important code. 2C is a code that applies in all situations when somebody is covered by the plan. So for any months an individual is covered by your plan, you always use 2C. So that could be at least 80 to 90% of your employees. So if you have a situation where you have very little turnover, and most everybody takes your coverage, then for all 12 months you would just put 2C there. But the problem is going to be if you have turnover, and people go in and out of your coverage, and so therefore you may have multiple codes during the year. Let's look at 2D. Enter 2D for any month during which the employee is in a limited non-assessment period, which means they're in a waiting period, or they're in a measurement period. Now, going through my example I had before, you have an employee that is hired on August 1st. So between January and July of 2015, I would put 2A for those months. You have a 2-month waiting period. Then I would use 2D for August and September. And then he took the coverage, he or she took the coverage. So October, November, December, I would put 2C there. So you can see how it gets complicated.
I wouldn't think you'd have to report anything for employed for 12 months.
Yeah, but they're doing it for the individual mandate and for the employer mandate. So they want to make sure they understand when they were offered coverage and why you didn't offer them coverage during the year. That's why these codes are extremely important to understand. And make sure you put the right code there. And that's what I said before. If somebody gives you an input sheet, you have to know what to put in the input sheets for a particular individual. That's what's going to make it complicated. Now, 2E. Enter 2E for any month in which a multi-employer interim guidance applies to that employee. What does that mean? It means that employee was eligible for a union collectively bargained plan and they turned it down. So you only enter 2E if they turn down the coverage. They're offered union plan, but they turned it down. Now, let's go to slide 24. If you look at codes 2F, 2G, and 2H, each of these are codes for affordability. When do they apply? They only apply in situations where somebody, you offer them coverage and they waived it. Because the IRS feels if somebody turns down your coverage, the possibility of them going to the exchange are great. So therefore, they want to know if your coverage is affordable. So 2F is the W-2 safe harbor, 2G is the federal poverty line safe harbor, and 2H is the rate of pay safe harbor. You only use 2F, 2G, and 2H only if that person waives coverage. If they took your coverage, you always use 2C. Two I, non-calendar year transitional rule. As I explained before, if you're 100 or more and you have a non-calendar year renewal date, for those months before your renewal date, you would always put 2I there as the code for everyone, because you're not subject to the employer mandate. And so if you have for example, October renewal date, you don't have to comply till October of 2015. Between January and August, you put 2I for everyone, because you're not subject to the mandate. Any questions? Is this getting a little easier? Hopefully. All right, let's go to slide 25. I've been using the term limited non-assessment period, and basically what I indicated before, you'll see this term, a limited non-assessment period, means either a waiting period or in a measurement period. So if you have somebody that is you're measuring as a variable hour employee, and they become full-time, for example, in September of 2015, for all months before that, you would put 2D there. Because they're in a limited non-assessment period, which means the employer mandate does not apply to them. But in slide 26, these are all, and slide 26 explains, hopefully you can read it, these are all the situations that are included in the limited non-assessment period. I'm not going to go through each one, you can read it later, but basically it's the waiting period or the measurement period. That's basically what they are. All right, let's go to slide 27. Slide 27, again, like the 1095B, the 1095C, Part 3 is only completed by, if you are self-insured. That section is very similar to the 1095B. This part is only completed if you're self-insured. This part must be completed for any employee who is enrolled in coverage, regardless of whether the employee is a full-time employee. So again, if somebody is on COBRA or retiree, you would complete it for them. And if the employer is required to complete this part, X must be entered into the box on the form. Slide 28. And again, slide 28 explains the situation if you are self-insured, who you have to offer a 1095C to. It includes a non-employed director, retired individual, terminated employee receiving COBRA, all of them would get a 1095C with Part 3 completed, because we have to do that for the individual mandate, because they're not getting a 1095B from the insurance company if you're self-insured. Extremely important to understand. So again, if the 1095C is used with respect to an individual who is not an employee for any month, Part 2 must be completed by using 1G for all 12 months or in a box for each month of the calendar year. Any questions? Let's go to slide 29. Just like the 1095C, we complete it for every individual that under the family that's covered. You have to, again, try to obtain the Social Security number for an individual. If you can't, then you have to use a date of birth. All right, let's go to slide 30. Now we're entering the form 1094C. The 1094C is, again, the applicable large employer, the name and address and EI number of the member. Yes. I'm sorry. Anybody have a question? All right, we're in part 1 of the 1094C, applicable large employer, the name and address of the employer. Line 7 through 8, the contact person's name, and make sure you enter a person who knows what's going on. Lines 9 through 12, because the IRS will actually call you. And it would be embarrassing when that person said, I don't know what you're talking about. Then a letter will follow. And it's not going to be pleasant. And again, lines 9 through 16 are only entered if you're a designated governmental entity. Again, only if you're filing for other entities. And line 18, the total number of 1095Cs indicated will be on line 18. Now, on line 31, on slide 31, this explains the authoritative transmittal. The box on line 19 is checked if this 1095C is an authoritative transmittal to report aggregate employer data. Now, if you're an employer, you don't have any control groups, none of that, then you would say yes. And because of the fact your 1095C will include all the aggregate information because you just have one employer. Or, let's say in my example, you have 3 employers and you've decided we're not going to do separate 1094Cs, we're just going to all file it together. Then in this situation, you would have just one 1094 filing, and that one would be the authoritative. So no problem. If only one 1094C is being filed for the employer, that form 1094C must report aggregate employer level data for the employer and be identified on line 19 as the authoritative transmittal. If you have multiple 1094Cs, again, as I indicated before, and as this slide indicates, you have to designate one as authoritative transmittal. Line 32. So lines 20 to 22 should be completed only by the authoritative transmittal. If this is not an authoritative transmittal, then lines 20 to 22, parts 3 and 4 are not completed. And line 20, enter the total number of 1095Cs, and that is on an aggregate basis. So that includes even those that you're filing because of the fact that they're not employees. That's the total number. Slide 33. On line 21, you indicate whether your employer is part of an aggregated LE group. That's basically part of a control group. And again, that's a control group under code sections 414B, C, and M. If you don't know it, ask your boss. If your boss doesn't know it, the accountant or attorney should know it. Again, it's important because if you are a member of a control group, then you have to complete column D, and then complete part 4 to list all other members of control groups. So again, if you don't get the information, that form will be incomplete, so you have to ask the question. So if all 12 months the employer will not be a member of a control group, check no and do not complete part 3 or column D. So if you're not a member of a control group, answer no and don't complete those other columns. Now, line 22, all the different boxes that you have here. This slide and the couple other slides identify the qualifying offer method. A qualifying offer method is an alternative method of offering the 1095-C to the employees. And if you look at slide 35, it defines what a qualifying offer is. A qualifying offer is an offer to one or more of the full-time employees for all months during the year for which the employee was a full-time employee, in which not within a limited non-assessment period of minimum essential coverage, and the employee cost for employee-only coverage does not exceed 9.5% of the mainland single poverty line, which is currently $11,670. Now, most employers are not using it because it's overly generous, but if your employer doesn't, and again, this is for only individual coverage, so if your employer is very generous and doesn't charge for individual coverage, you may qualify for this. And if you qualify for this, one, you don't have to complete line 15 of 1095-C, and two, you could provide the 1095-C a different way by providing a statement to your employees. Now, what I want to do is skip slide 36, 37, and 38, and go to slide 39. Now, if you want, instead of providing the employee a copy of the 1095-C, which you could do, which is explained on slide 39, is give them a statement, which includes the employer's name, address, and EIN number, contact name and telephone number, a statement indicating that for all 12 months of the calendar year, the employee, his or her spouse or dependents received a qualifying offer, and then a statement directing the employee to see publication 974. You can either do that or give them a 1095-C. I don't know why they came up with this, it's just extra work. Let's go on to slide 40. I would advise you, as I indicated before, for all purposes, never complete box B. Basically, what you indicate to the IRS, some months we offered a qualifying offer to some employees, and other months we didn't. I would skip B, so I'm not going to cover it. I would skip slide 40, 41. It's there if you want to read it, but again, I've studied this and I don't think there's any way that you would ever want to use this. Slide 42, 42, slide 43, and let's go to slide, let's skip those and go all the way to slide 45. This is the 4980H transitional relief. And again, what I'm advising you is that all employers should complete that, should check the box. It applies to any employer with 100 or more or 50 to 99. If you don't check the box, you don't get the transitional relief. So if the employer checks the box, it must complete Form 1094-C Part 3, Column E, which means you just indicate what code applies. I'll show you that in a few minutes. So I would advise you always to check box C. Box D is the 98% method on slide 46. This box is checked if the employer is eligible for and using the 90% offer method. Under this method, you're offering coverage to 98% of your employees and full-time employees and their dependents. If you do that, if you check that box, the only advantage of checking that box, and that is discussed on slide 47, is the fact that you don't have to complete Part 3, Column B on the 1094-C. So you leave it blank. All right, let's move on to slide 48. Slide 48, Part 3, Column A, That's if you provide minimal essential coverage. You mark it yes in two situations. Either you're between 50 to 99, or if you are over 100 and you offer coverage to 70% of your full-time employees and their dependents. If you do that, you always answer it yes. If you haven't, you would have to answer it no, but that just means you're going to be penalized by the Internal Revenue Service. Because one of the requirements for 2015, you have to offer coverage to 70% of your full-time employees and their dependents. So for any month you answer no, then you know you're going to be penalized under the $2,000 penalty for that month. Now, slides 50, 51, and 52 explain some of this. Now, slide 51, full-time employee count, you include all employees who are not in a measurement period or a waiting period. So you include all full-timers, and you don't have to complete that line, that column, if you meet the 98% offer method. Column C is the total number of employees, and you have a choice of either using the first day of the month or the last day of the month, but be consistent all throughout the year. So you have, again, so what the purpose behind these columns is the IRS is going to do some math, and they're going to determine whether you met the employer mandate. So this information, as I said before, what you're doing by completing this form is reporting on yourself, and they're going to determine whether you offered coverage to enough individuals. So no matter what you pick on column A, if they look at the full-time figure and they total up the number of 1095Cs and said, there's some inconsistencies here. So again, make sure all the forms hang together and make sure they are consistent with the different answers you give. So column C is the total number of employees. That includes full-time, part-time. But remember, in this, you don't include individuals that are partners or 2% shareholder, more than 2% shareholders in an S corp. You don't include those. But all other employees, you enter into that. Slide 53. Slide 53 indicates column D, aggregate group indicator. If you're a member of a control group, you have to check the boxes for every month you're a member of a control group. If you're not, just leave it blank. Now, if you do check the boxes in column D, make sure you understand the fact that you have to complete part 4. And then slide 54, column E, this is an extremely important column. If you satisfy the requirements of the transitional leave between 15 and 99, you enter code A. If you're over 100, you enter code B. And then part 4, you indicate in part 4, as I indicated before, you indicate all members of the control group. You're listing them according to which member has the most employees. Now the question, and let's go to slide 57. Slide 57 indicates what the penalties for noncompliance. The penalties for noncompliance are the fact that if you don't file the returns, either don't file them with the IRS, that's $100 per return, and if you don't give it to the employees, another $100. So it could be $200 per return if you fail to either file them and or if you don't give them to the participants. Now the question is, how stringent are they going to be for 2015? Slide 58 indicates they're going to be lenient. They're going to be lenient if you have a good faith, if you make a good faith effort. But the problem is they haven't defined what a good faith effort is. So I would assume if you have a few mistakes on your return, no problem. They'll just advise you to do it, and and you would fix it. But if it's full of mistakes or it's incomplete, that's going to be not to be deemed a good faith effort. So again, and that rule is only going to be true for 2015. So they're going to give you 1 year to get it right, and after that they're going to be more stringent. So the final thought here, what information needs to be collected? Slide 59 indicates what information you have to complete for each employee. First of all, employment date for each employee who became full-time during 2015, months during 2015 in which the employee was a full-time or part-time employee, months in 2015 in which the employee was subject to a waiting period or measurement period, months in 2015 in which the employee was offered minimum essential coverage with minimum value, months in 2015 in which the employee was covered by minimum essential coverage, months in 2015 in which the minimum essential coverage was offered to the spouse and or dependent children. If an employee waived coverage, what affordability safe harbor applied. For each month, the amount of the employee contribution for the lowest cost monthly premium for individual coverage. And for self-insured plans, the names and social security numbers for each member of the employee's family and what months they were covered. So that's what you have to collect for each employee. Now for the employer, that's slide 60. Were you a member of a control group during 2015? If yes, which member, the names of each member, the total number of full-time employees for each month, the total number of all employees for each month, did any transitional rule apply to you for 2015, and for what months during 2015 did you cover at least 70% of full-time employees? So that's all the information you have to collect, and you have to start doing it now because you're over 5 months behind. Yes?
So what I don't understand is employees that waive coverage, and there's a certain safe harbor. But I don't see one that says, well, I have coverage through my spouse somewhere else.
Doesn't matter.
So they don't take our coverage because they have coverage.
Yeah, but they waive your coverage, but the coverage you offer them must be affordable.
Okay.
All right, that's why you put the code there. It doesn't matter if they take what other coverage they take. It doesn't matter.
What's the safe harbor? What is the code? If they waive coverage.
What the IRS says, if you waive coverage, the possibility is there's a better possibility you're going to go to the exchange. Yes, going to the spouse's plan is an alternative, but you're more likelihood to go on the exchange. So therefore, they want to know what affordability safe harbor applies in that situation. Pardon?
What code would we use?
You either use 2F, 2G, 2F, 2G, 2H, depending on which safe harbor applies. And I'm saying is those codes only apply if a person waives coverage, because then the likelihood, 50-50 chance, that person's going to buy insurance on the exchange. If they took your coverage, the IRS doesn't care because they're not going to go on the exchange. All right?
Going through your open enrollment and offering coverage, you need to ask them, why aren't you waiving coverage?
No, you don't have to ask.
Well, you have to put a code there, you kind of have to know, right?
No, it doesn't matter. Please, it doesn't matter. It matters to you as an employer when you offer them coverage, was that coverage affordable for single coverage? As long as it's affordable, we don't care where they go. It doesn't matter. All right? Now, the confusion when these returns were first, these forms were first released is, when does 2C apply? 2C applies in all situations where somebody takes your coverage. The other codes apply when they don't take your coverage. If they waive the coverage, now the most important form, as I said this before, in 2015 is going to be the waiver form. Because you have to have evidence they waived coverage, and you have to have evidence that coverage was affordable. And you have a choice of 3 different safe harbors to use. All right? Any other questions? Now, I'm helping 2 vendors with software packages, which should be coming out in a few months. And I'll let everybody know who they are and what they are. But again, no matter what software package you buy from any vendor, you have to have basic knowledge of these forms in order to complete any input sheets they give you. Because if you give them wrong information, they're just going to produce a wrong return. So you have to have some basic knowledge how these forms work in order to complete the input sheets. Because they're only going to be working on information that you give them. Yes?
Back to our question back here, how do they know which safe harbor to choose? Which of those three? That's kind of they understand they have to choose one, but which one to put?
Probably the two choices are either the rate of pay or the W-2 safe harbor. The rate of pay is, it's whatever you pay them per hour times 130 hours per month. That's the rate of pay safe harbor. So that's what you base your 9.5% off of. So if somebody is making 10 bucks an hour times 130 hours, multiply that by 9.5%. That's the most that the employee will pay for individual coverage. The other safe harbor is a W-2, but it's current year W-2. And you have to make adjustments during the year, which is a pain. Because you don't know until the end of the year how much they're going to put on the W-2. It's box 1. So, and again, the federal poverty line is probably the most generous because it's 9.5% of $11,670, which is very inexpensive premiums. Any other questions? Are you ready for some wine? I'm sorry, go ahead.
I do have a question. And I think I know this. We have to, according to our union contract, we have to offer anybody with 25 hours full benefits. But at 20 hours a week, we have to offer, but we only pay half of what the board would pay normally. So instead of paying $22 a paycheck or $40 a month, they end up paying like $250. But do I not have to do a
5C?
1095C because they're not really full-time? Or I do it and don't have to do it?
Well, is the union coverage self-insured? No, you wouldn't have to do it. Yes. Now remember, and again, this is the most common question I've been getting. Remember, if you have employees that are union, your responsibility is to give every employee that's full-time a 1095C, unless you arrange with the union for them to do it. Ultimately, because you're the employer and you provide them with a W-2, and if they're full-time during 2015, it's your responsibility to provide the 1095C. So you have to talk to the union to see what they're going to be doing and whether they're going to be doing any reporting. This is the time to approach them and say, listen, who is going to do are you going to do the 1095C for us? Now, your reporting responsibility, if you're insured on the 1095C, you're only supposed to give a 1095C for those that are full-time. That's where the employer mandate kicks in. Anyone who's full-time, you have an employer mandate to them. So that's why this 1095C is extremely important. All right?
Now, is that based on your measurement period from last year, or would that tie to this year, monitoring those people who are part-time?
It would be the measurement period last year because you have to determine whether they're full-time during 2015. So it's going to be any measurement periods in either 2013 or 2014 because you have to make that determination as of January.
So then the people that become 1 year, let's say that I do a look back. Let's say I was hired in let's say my measurement period was like October 13th through November 30th of 2014. That was my measurement period. So my 2 months, and then my enrollment was January 1st.
That would be your stability period. And then you use that measurement period to determine whether you're full-time. And if that person was full-time, you would have to indicate and give them a 1095C all the way, because they're treated as full-time all during the stability period. So therefore, they would be treated as a full-time for the entire year.
So if they become full-time within 2015, do I have to offer them health insurance, or do they wait until my stability period back?
No, you would always have to offer them coverage at the beginning of any stability period. So any stability period. Now, the only exception to that is if you have a new employee and their measurement period ends sometime in 2015, and you have to offer them coverage because every new employee gets their own stability period, because those employees would be full-time sometime in 2015. Those that were hired in 2014.
Right, right. Those are the people I'm kind of confused about.
Well, in that situation, remember when you're looking at the look-back periods, if you look in look-back periods, any new employee gets their own measurement period. So anybody hired in 2014, and you treat them as a variable hour employee, they will become full-time if they meet that 1560 for 12 months during 2015. So again, you may have to offer them coverage and give them a 1095C in 2015.
That's what so that's false, right?
Right.
Okay.
Now, one other thing I just want to, suppose you say to yourself, what are you talking about measurement periods? And you know nothing about it. The problem is going to be if you don't have records and you can't use the look-back measurement periods, then basically the IRS says you have to use the monthly measurement method, which means you determine whether they're full-time for each month, and then you offer them coverage the beginning of the 4th month. So that means employees will move in and out of coverage depending how many hours they complete in any month, which is going to be a nightmare, an absolute nightmare. But again, if you can collect information and do a look-back period, that's the best way to do it. Yes?
Okay, for an example, we have a measurement period of a January through an October, January 1 through October 31st. Whatever it is. Anyway, 31st. We take any part-time employee, all employees, we're measuring in that time frame what their average hours are.
You don't do the average, you do the total at the end.
Okay, so the total at the end, if they haven't met the 10 times 130, right? Okay. So 1,300 hours, if they haven't met that, then they would not be eligible.
They would not be treated. And remember, anytime you measure, and for any employee that hasn't completed the total number of hours, in this example, they use 10 months, 130 per month, which is 1,300. If somebody hasn't completed 1,300, they're not full-time. That means that the next stability period, they're not treated as full-time, and therefore they wouldn't get a 1095C.
Okay, all right.
That's why this calculation is extremely important to determine, especially if you have a lot of variable hour. Remember, what you have to do when you hire somebody, you have to categorize them as either full-time, part-time, or variable hour. And then for variable hour employees, then you can put them through a measurement period to see when they become full-time. Now, another difficult situation, if you have people moving in from part-time to full-time, full-time to part-time, if you have people that move back and forth in that, you have to measure then all employees, because then all your employees would be variable. So again, there's some employers that have people moving around in different categories, and that's a complete nightmare.
Now, if you hire someone partway through that, let's say they didn't hire in until May 1, so are you then taking the May 1 to that October 31st and taking it 150 hours for each month they were there?
Her question is for new employees. Remember, every new employee gets their own initial measurement period. And if you use 10 months for ongoing employees, you have to use 10 months for new employees. So it would be a 10-month, measurement period with a 10-month stability period. And that's what you would use. But as you can see in this situation, these forms are not easy, they're very difficult, and it's going to take time to learn them. So please take the time to understand and learn them. If you have any questions, let me know. My contact information is on the back slide. And so I'm on retainer with Bill, so he can call me anytime with any questions. I'll be sticking around. If you want to break some glasses, I'll be around, so thank you very much, okay?